let's start. Neurotechnology is a very interdisciplinary field, and having basic knowledge in neuroscience and signal acquisition and also data processing, of course, is a very necessary step in order to have at least the overall understanding of the field. Today, we will open a series of seminars with some basic neuroscience knowledge, and in the next events that we hope we participate, we will cover the rest. So, the plan for today is the following. In the first two chapters, I will introduce the science of the brain, neuroscience, and from there on, my colleagues, Mo, will talk about the momentum. Yeah, he's on the camera too, you can see him. He will talk about the momentum of the 21st century. This means neurotechnology. Nista will analyze the ethics in neurotechnology. And last but not least, Marco will introduce to you our team and the rest of the team members. Again, I would like to remind you again to keep your cameras and microphones off. Open your microphones in the Q&A questions if you feel comfortable. And any question or any answer, because you have to pay attention, I will make some small questions during the presentation. Please write on the chat box below or above. It depends on where you have it. So sit comfortably and enjoy. Yeah, enjoy. So according to the brain is the most important organ of the body. No bias at all. Let's check some math first. The human brain has a mass of 1.5 kilograms, but yet it consumes 20% of our body energy. This means around 20 watts, and this means that it is enough light to enough energy to light up a small lamp. It is very complex. As maybe some of you have heard it before, it consists of hundreds of billions of neurons that they are interconnected with each other. And the most important thing, in some cases, they form different connections even among humans. Also, it consists of hundreds of billions of thousands of miles of blood vessels that keep the organ healthy and alive. Even though the brain looks like a chaos, it's so wisely created, I can assure you for that, and it's organized that it functions like the most perfect machine. And the science that makes these functions, this chaos in order, it's neuroscience. And today we will see together some of the most important principles. So, as I said, the human brain, yeah, okay, the right slide, right. As I said, the human brain consists of billions of neurons. However, the location of the cell matters a lot. So the first thing we're going to talk about is brain anatomy. According to Paul MacLean, we have this model, and we can categorize the brain parts into three parts. First of all, we have the reptilian brain. Then we have the limbic brain, and afterwards the neocortex. About the reptilian brain is the most primitive one, and it is responsible for vital functions as, for example, heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, posture, and body balance. This part above, it's called limbic brain, and it's mainly responsible for conscious and subconscious emotions. For example, when I see a snake, my limbic system will respond with fear, whether the snake is poisonous or not. And at this point, I would like to focus more on two specific structures of the limbic brain. The one is hippocampus, as you can see here, and the other is amygdala. So the hippocampus is related mainly to the consolidation of the short-term memory to long-term memory. And the typical example that shows its function is Alzheimer's disease. I'm pretty sure that many of you have heard of this disease. And yeah, it's a neurodegenerative disease that affects memory. And the reason that affects memory is because the cell's death begins from the hippocampi, so from the brain part we're talking about. And that's the reason that the most typical and early symptom is memory loss. On the other hand, we have the amygdala, which is the Greek word for almonds, because they are almond shaped. And from amygdala, it's generated the emotion of fear. For example, fear of snakes, fear of heights, fear of the dark, who knows? And gives a very typical response of fight or flight. Afterwards, the part that covers the limbic brain and the reptilian brain is called neocortex, and is the processor of higher cognitive functions, as the activation of its part gives us a certain behavior. The activation, for example, of the temporal lobe is correlated with auditory perception and speech. And apart from that, researchers have shown that damage and problems on the temporal lobe have shown problems and issues in face recognition. Afterwards, we go to the next part, the occipital lobe, this pinky here, and it's the one that is responsible for visual processes. This means that it decomposes the images in color, texture, depth of field, and makes them up again in order for our brain to understand it in the brain language. Afterwards, we go to the parietal lobe. It's a master of senses, as we say. It integrates sensory information among various modalities, and it offers a complete perception of our surrounding. Last but not least, frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is said from many researchers that maybe defines us from the other animals. It functions every time we need to make a decision, and it is the logical voice of the brain. But not only that, it also defines a big part of our personality. A distinctive example is this railway worker. His name is Phineas Gates, that he had a small accident, as we can see here, like a large pole penetrated his skull in this way, without fortunately killing him. However, he had major changes in his personality and turned him from a good and very active man to a very lazy and very rude man. Something else worth knowing is these two stripes here. It's the one stripe is the sensory cortex, and it belongs to the parietal lobe, as we said, for sensory processing. And the other stripe is the motor cortex and belongs to the frontal lobe. And actually, these two stripes are distorted, let's say, representation of the human body based on a neurological map of the areas. And additionally, it shows the proportions of the human brain that are dedicated to processing either motor functions or the sensory functions from different body parts. And as we can observe in the picture, for example, here on the motor cortex, the face is overrepresented on the motor cortex. And this indeed makes sense because, as you can imagine, we use a lot of muscles in order to do several face expressions, or the hands are overrepresented on the sensory cortex because indeed humans need to get tactile stimuli, and our fingers and our hands are very sensitive. So, to summarize, I have a nice abbreviation and a nice memory trick to remember the name of all the lobes. It took me some time to learn everything by heart, but I have it ready for you. And it's the word Topf. The word Topf is a German word for cooking pot. And T stands for temporal, O stands for occipital, P for parietal, and F for frontal lobe. So every time you want to recall it, just remember Topf. All right? All right. Another thing that I would like to point out here is that in order to complete a task, we use multiple lobes. We don't use only one lobe, especially when the task is very complex. Here we can see some brain scans that shows the activation of the brain when a person completes a specific task. when you hear the words from me right now, of course, your temporal lobe is activated. When you see the words on the presentation, the occipital lobe is activated. When I speak the words, then because I move my hands and my lips, the motor cortex, like the stripe we talked about before, is activated. And of course, the temporal lobe, because I'm listening what I'm saying. And when I generate words, as I'm doing right now, this is more complex. So this requires my frontal lobe, because I have to make meaningful sentences, and the motor cortex, and the temporal lobe, and other parts. Now I have a question for you, and I hope you pay attention to what I've said before. So the brain is divided into two hemispheres. The right one is responsible for the left side of the body, and the left one is responsible for the right side of the body. Some people claim that an artist uses more the right side, but a mathematician, like me, uses the left side. Do you think it's a myth or not? This is the point that you can write on the chat box your answers, I guess. Yes. Not a myth. So is it a myth or not? I didn't get it. It is not a myth. So you say it is true, Christina. Ah, it's true. Actually, sorry to disappoint you, but it's not true. Sorry for the artists and the mathematicians in here. Because almost all tasks are analyzed by both hemispheres. But however, there are some studies that have shown that some tasks like speech are more correlated to the activity of the one hemisphere, and particularly speech is correlated to the left hemisphere, as we will see later on. The only connecting structure between the two hemispheres is called Corpus Callosum. And here we can see a horizontal cut of the human brain, and imagine that we are seeing that from below. And the corpus callosum, it's this part here. And we will find pathways connecting the one hemisphere to another. And my basic question would be, what if the corpus callosum is damaged? And the answer is that if the corpus callosum is damaged, then all the pathways from the one hemisphere to the other are lost, are closed. And the other question is how this can be translated into the human's behavior. So we have, this is very, very typical example. Let's suppose that there is a person with split brain, as we would say. So there's no connection between right and left hemisphere. And so he has two animals in front of him. There is a dog on there that he can perceive it with the right visual field, and there is a cat that he can perceive it with the left visual field. And my question here is, what if I ask this person with split brain, what do you see right now? The question is, what is he going to say? What's he going to answer? And I won't keep you a lot. I will give the answer on my own. He's going to answer that he sees the dog, because even though he perceives the cat, he cannot verbally express it. And I will explain why. So with the visual field, with the right visual field, he sees the dog. So this is projected on the left side of the brain. And with the left visual field, he perceives the cat, and this is projected on the right side of the brain. But as we said before, the speech part, the part of the brain that is responsible for speech, lies on the left side. So when he wants to speak, the speech part is able to communicate only with the left brain hemisphere. So it will take information only from the left occipital lobe and not from the right occipital lobe. So this person will answer that I see a dog. I hope it was clear for everyone. You can ask later if you have any questions. So until this part, we talked about the main categorization of the brain. I'm sorry, which is the reptilian brain, the limbic brain. On the limbic brain, we emphasized more on two distinct structures. That was the hippocampi and the amygdala. Then we went up to the neocortex and we talked about the top and the lobes. Afterwards, we talked about the very important stripes, the motor and sensory cortex. And afterwards, we talked about the two brain hemispheres and what happens if the connection between those two hemispheres is lost.